Hi again, everyone. Gary Digital Williams here on the Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network. And the Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network can be heard on many different streaming platforms, including Stitcher and Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Podcast app, TuneIn, and Google Podcast. You can also hear my podcast on Twitter. I'm on Digital25, my Facebook page, the Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network page, and also on my YouTube page. Go to Gary Williams. And took a couple weeks off. Took a little over a week off for a very specific reason. I'll get to that a little bit later on in this podcast. This is a major part of what we're going to talk about this week. And also talk about we had a couple of very late results we do want to get into. And also I want to talk about some commentaries that I have about the business at large, because there are a couple of things that happened over the last couple of weeks that I just did not like. I really didn't, and I want to talk about that. And then finally, I have some tributes to give out. We lost some quality people in the last couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about that as well. Around none in the boxing business, but around the area. One of them I was pretty close to. He was a good friend of mine, but I do want to talk about that as well. The Boxing on the Beltway Podcast Network brought to you as always by Real-Time Pain Relief. From boxers to ballerinas for shoulder pain and muscle strain, everything between, Boxing Along the Beltway recommends Real-Time Pain Relief, natural, plant-based, safe, fast, and effective ointment. You go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of Real-Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real-Time Pain Relief, now endorsed by two-time world heavyweight champion Big George Foreman. So try his knockout formula for Real-Time Pain Relief. Rub it on. The pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. She has great weight loss tips, great jewelry, and great training methods. All at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Well, we had a couple of results this past couple of weeks in the last part of November. One of them, the educated boxer Dorian Bostic out of Dundalk, Maryland, by way of Charlotte, South Carolina. He scored a first-round technical knockout over the debuting James Anderson at the River Place in Fort Mill, South Carolina. A couple things about that card we'll talk about in just a moment. But I think from what I read, Bostic knocked out Anderson. He knocked him down twice on the way to the victory. Ended, I believe, at 132 of the first round. Bostic remains undefeated. He's 4-0. All four of his wins by knockout. And I believe all four of his wins. Oh, yeah. He had one win in the second round. The other three were in the first round. So congratulations to Dorian Bostic. Now, Akeem Action Jackson out of Atlanta, Maryland, he was scheduled to be on that card. His bout was scratched. But the ring announcer for that card was my good friend, my brother, Henry Discombobulating Jones. So it was great to see him get some work, especially in this troubling times of the pandemic. He got some work during that card. So Dorian Bostic will be a very busy man. Got a couple bouts already lined up for 2021. So hope to see more of him. Hope to see him at all in the Beltway. So we'll see what happens there. But congratulations once again to Dorian Bostic, the educated boxer out of Dundalk, Maryland, winning by first round TKO. Then on Saturday, November 28th, at Staples Center in Los Angeles, California, Suleiman Sagawa, who is a lightweight out of Silver Spring, Maryland, by way of Uganda, Kampala, Uganda. He was knocked out in the seventh round by Jermaine Ortiz for the vacant WBC US NBC silver lightweight title. And it was knocked out. Ortiz was knocked out in the seventh round. So a tough loss for him. Sagawa's record is now 13-2-1 with 4 KOs. Jermaine Ortiz remains undefeated, 13-0, now 7 KOs. So congratulations once again. Actually, I think we got to update these now. So this is 14-0, 8 KOs. And Sagawa is 13-3 with 1 draw and 4 KOs. So tough break for Suleiman Sagawa. Again, a guy I've never seen in the area, but he has been from Silver Spring. He's boxed out of Silver Spring for a number of years now. So tough break again for Suleiman Sagawa. Now, as you can probably tell by my voice is not quite up to par. Got a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of fatigue, not as bad as it was, and I'll get to that in a moment. but I'm a little bit under the weather still. Actually, not under the weather. That's wrong. That's not the right thing to say. I am recovering at this moment. You see, on right after Thanksgiving, I've been feeling kind of down and ill and really exhausted over the past few months. And it's even been at times difficult to do this particular podcast because I was very fatigued during the time. And the Friday after Thanksgiving, I decided I'm just going to go ahead and figure out what's going on. So I decided, with my wife's assistance, of course, to go to the hospital. And I found, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. That's a little bit out of order. I had found out because over those past couple weeks, my abdomen had been really hurting me. And I knew something was wrong. And I found out that I went to the urgent care, one of the urgent care locations, and they just said that I had gallstones. So I had gallstones. So it just kept the pain kept getting worse. I didn't want to eat. I was still very exhausted. So the Friday after Thanksgiving, I decided to go in. Actually, I take it back. It was Saturday after Thanksgiving. Let's change that. Saturday after Thanksgiving, I decided to take myself to the hospital. And when they diagnosed me, they knew that my gallbladder had to be removed. And so on November 28th, Sunday, I had my gallbladder removed. And I had it done. And I was in the hospital until Monday of this current week. And no, Tuesday. I'm sorry, this Tuesday current week. And it was a very unique experience. I'm not going to get into it too deeply, but it was something that I needed to do. Something I'm very glad I did. And I'm very, very proud of myself because I kind of spurred the decision, which I normally don't do when it comes to medical situations. I spurred the decision to go get myself looked at and get it done. So I've been back home since Tuesday of this week. And overall, I felt very good. I'm still recovering, so I'm still not getting my wind back, so to speak. I do plan to go to work this weekend, my real job. And I'm for those who don't know, I am a tour guide at Arlington National Cemetery. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I know, again, my wind's not completely there yet, but we'll see what happens. But I do plan to do it. So that's where I've been the last couple weeks. No boxing, just taking care of myself. Okay. Now, when I say no boxing, I'm not completely exactly right because I've been, paying attention to what was going on in the boxing scene, and quite frankly, there are a couple of things that I just don't like, and I want to talk about that this week. That's my big thing. So this is a rare podcast in the sense that I am straying away from the Beltway because not a whole lot's going on in the Beltway. Next week, we will have a calendar for you and talk about some of the things that I planned for the area as far as our box is concerned. Nothing in the area is going on. But I had a couple things that happened. A couple things that have happened in the boxing world that, quite frankly, I just don't like. And let me start with this, I think, a unbelievable sham that's been put on the boxing world by this pay-per-view. And how it got on pay-per-view, I do not know. But this pay-per-view doubleheader that featured Mike Tyson taking on Roy Jones Jr. and also this co-feature with Jake Paul taking on former basketball player, NBA player Nate Robinson. I'll start with the main event first. And I know people are going to say, well, it was an exhibition. It didn't really matter. But, it's like having a Legends game. No, it's not like a Legends game. And this is going to be the central theme through both situations that I'm going to talk about this week, as far as this is concerned. Legends games, I've been to many of them. I remember growing up in D.C. and going to the Crackerjack All-Star baseball game that they had, and the Legends would come and play, and I never forget 75-year-old Luke Appling hitting a home run at RFK Stadium. That was one of the great moments of my life. I loved it. And I was there. I was so glad I was there to see it with my dad. But this is a totally different ball game. This is boxing. And you'll probably hear me say this many times during the course of this podcast. But it was a situation where, excuse me. It was a situation where, these two guys, even at the ages of 50, which is where they are now, still trying to hurt each other, still trying to hit each other, beat each other up. That's a totally different ball game. And it's not like the Legends All-Star basketball game. It's not even like, in fact, they don't have a Legends All-Star. That's why they don't have a Legends All-Star football game. They do is a touch football game. It's not a tackle football game. And it's just ridiculous. And I read this week, in fact today, that the event grossed 1.5 million pay-per-view buys. Every one of y'all are suckers for doing it. I have no desire to see Roy Jones fight ever again, especially after he lost to bouts like Antonio Tarver and bouts where he was knocked out face first on the canvas. I saw Mike Tyson's last fight. I have no desire to see him fight again. And it was just, it was remarkable that people even shelled out money, especially in these times, for that foolishness. It was ridiculous. It was totally ridiculous. And what it has done, it has spawned other people to do this. Other retired legendary boxers to do this. Riddick Bowe wants to fight, Lennox Lewis wants to fight Riddick Bowe. Buster Douglas, for some God knows strange reason, wants a rematch with Mike Tyson. You pulled off the greatest upset possibly in the history of boxing. And you want a rematch for that foolishness. That's stupid. That's stupid. And it's just no way that these events should be happening. These commissions need to step in there, and I don't care if it is an exhibition. These commissions need to step in and say, no, we won't have this foolishness. Simple as that. Yeah, it's about preserving their legacy. I get that. But I just don't want them to hurt themselves as well as their legacy. And that is why I was so upset with that. My room where I'm doing this podcast, the front door is about, I'd say, maybe 6 feet from me. I wouldn't want that 6 feet to watch any of that foolishness. Which leads to the second part of this. The matchup between Jake Paul, who's a U2 star, and if he's a U2 star, I have no idea what planet he's from. Because I have never heard of the man. And I heard he's been in boxing and all that, and he's probably pretty good. And he took on Nate Robinson, who's one of the better point guards in the recent history of the NBA. 3-time slam dunk champion. And that's saying something given his height. He's not 6 feet. And they took on each other in the co-feature of that card. And by now you've probably seen if not the actual knockout, you've seen the memes that have followed, which, a little crazy, a little funny. You got the preachers yelling, "Wake up" for Nate Robinson. Now, for that bout, Nate Robinson earned $600. Probably $599 more than he deserved, but that's what he got. But here's where I'm having the major issue with this. Because of the pay-per-view buys, Robinson ended up making somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000. And then somebody put out a staggering bit of information. What Nate Robinson made that night, combining his purse and the pay-per-view buys, was more than listen to me now, the top 14 female boxers in the business today. Combined. That means he made more than Clarissa Shields. He made more than our very own Franchon Cruz-Dezurn, WBC super middleweight champion. Jessica Bob. It's just, Heather Hardy, if she's still in the business. She just he made more money in that 1-2 round piece of foolishness than the top 14 boxers in the world combined. That's pathetic. And while I don't blame Clarissa Shields for trying her hand at MMA, she just signed a multi-year deal. The fact that she even had to think about doing that sickens my stomach. It really does. We crossed a threshold with women's boxing because of the strong amateur showing we put out over the years. That they didn't have to come. When I first started covering boxing, the female boxers, a lot of them came from not necessarily mixed martial arts, but from martial arts. Okay, I remember we had an Andra Gorman boxer here in the Beltway who was a kung fu mistress. She was an expert in kung fu. And at 30 years old, she tried to do a boxing show. Okay. Isra Gergera, Wynn, didn't come from martial arts. I believe she came from soccer, if memory serves me correct. Become a boxer. So, they had to come from other sports back then. But now, since the Olympic and the amateur program has gotten so much better, they don't have to do that anymore. And this sets them back so many years because, again, you look at people like Franchon Cruz-Dezurn. You look at people like Tori Nelson, who we've had for so many years. Clarissa Shields, of course, is the mainstream right now. I think Cecilia Breakhouse maybe retired now. Jessica Bopp out of Mexico. I believe she's from Mexico. These ladies and others like them, devoted their lives to this craft, I should say. And they can't make more than some former NBA basketball player who's trying boxing really for the very first time. That was his debut. Hope it's the last time we ever see him in the boxing ring. But it's pathetic. It's pathetic. It makes no sense. And I just pray, because all it's going to take is one of these so-called wannabe boxers getting hurt in the manner of a Maxim Dadashev, who I saw get killed pretty much in front of my own eyes. All it takes for one of them to be like a Pritchard Cologne, who I saw get his life destroyed. Thank God he did not die. But his life is never the same because of this. Because again, as we always say, people know, you don't play this sport. This is a business, especially at this level. This is a business. And I think both those events made an absolute mockery of this business. And I don't care who wants to debate me on this. It ain't about the Legends. And this is not, as I said before, this is not a Legends baseball game where all the great legends get together and they play. There's no contact there. Everything's slower. Everything wants to be slower. I don't know how much. Well, definitely in the Robinson Paul situation, nothing was slow there. But it's a totally different game, and I, for one, hope it never, ever, ever happens again, because it was that ridiculous. So those are my two comments on those recent events. It just made me sick. It really did. It really made me sick to see both of those events take place. Now, some trivia to get to. First of all, while I was in hospital, I found out that a very good friend of mine, who was one of the best basketball players to ever come out of Washington D.C., passed away. He was a guy I considered a good friend because we got to know each other very well after his playing days, and when he worked for FedEx and worked in the school system a little bit. And he's a great guy. His name was Rodney Wright. Rodney Wright played at Eastern Senior High School back in the mid-'70s. And he would team up with another man who we just lost this year. I talked about him on this podcast too. I remember James Ratliff. And they would, along with their coach, who at that time was at Eastern, by the name of A.B. Williamson. He's, thank God, still with us. And they had one of the best basketball teams in the D.C. public schools, one of the best basketball teams in the nation. And so, after their playing days in high school, and I remember both of them were in the 1977, I think it was, Capital Classic, which was the Capital Classic that had some of the greatest American basketball players on one team in its history. The Capital Classic has not reached that since. On one team, you had the likes of Irvin Magic Johnson. You had Gene Tinkerbell Banks out of Duke. Magic Johnson, of course, went to Michigan State. Albert King, who ended up going to Maryland. And Darnell Valentine went to Kansas. Jeff Ruin, Iona. Al Wood, North Carolina. I mean, there's so many. I could go through the whole group, but I won't do it at this time. But it was a tremendous team. But James Ratliff, Rodney Wright played on the Capital All-Stars that year. And then James Ratliff went to Tennessee. And Rodney Wright went to Oral Roberts University. And, of course, I talked about James Ratliff, how they wanted to make Ratliff the next Bernard King, Albert King's older brother. He was one of the greatest basketball players to ever come out of that university. He and Ernie Grunfeld, the former general manager of the Washington Wizards, were the Bernie and Ernie show back in those days. And Rodney Wright played at Oral Roberts, and things didn't go very well then. At that time, A.B. Williamson, the coach, had moved on to Howard University. We became the head coach there. And he ended up getting Wright and Ratliff, should say, to transfer. And they transferred to Howard. And they would form the nucleus of one of the greatest single basketball teams in the history of Washington, D.C. They were known as the Dunk Patrol. Now, growing up in Washington, D.C., especially in the urban area of Washington, D.C., for lack of a better term, Howard basketball was big. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go to Howard University. That's why I ended up going there. Because it was the university, of course, with its history is so beautiful, but the basketball team was out of this world. They would pack the Bird Gymnasium each and every night. You had to really, really scramble to get a ticket to see them play. And the Dunk Patrol was others, because not only did they have Rodney Wright and James Ratliff, they also had a man by the name of Larry Spriggs. And Larry Spriggs was the forward on the team, the small forward. James Ratcliffe was a power forward, and Rodney Wright was a point guard. And those three, plus some great supporting characters, would wow Bird Gymnasium. And they would win the MEAC title, I think, once. And, Rodney Wright was the catalyst. He was the catalyst of the Dunk Patrol. He was one that set them in motion. And it was a phenomenal time to watch basketball at that time, leading into some of the greatest era of basketball. So I got to know Roddy very well over the years when I started doing, in fact, their last year, because I think their last year, Roddy was a senior, and guys like Bernard Perry, Gino Warner, they were juniors. And so my first year as a public address announcer for the men was their last year. And it was a joy, and I got to know them well during that time, and it was just great. And Roddy's just a great dude. He really was a great guy, really happy all the time. And it's going to be tough. We've lost, Howard has lost three of his greatest players this year during all this. Now, Roddy had been ill for a while, so I'm pretty sure COVID had nothing to do with his passing. I think the only one of the three that passed from COVID might have been Gerald Glover, who was for many years, the all-time leading scorer at Howard. He was a little bit before me. I probably saw him play when I was a kid, but I really didn't know him at all. But I knew Ratcliffe, I knew Rodney, and they were great guys. I would miss them both, definitely, no question about that. So that's one of the tributes, Rodney Wright, the catalyst of the Dunk Patrol. The second one I want to talk about is a guy that I never knew him, but I knew a lot about his history because I'd always been a sports fan, and of course I had heard about him and watching shows like Greatest Sports Legends and seeing him I think he was on the Superstars, the old ABC shows. I knew about him and knew his story. Man by the name of Rayford Johnson. Rayford Johnson, in 1956, won the silver medal in the decathlon. He was out of UCLA. He won the silver medal in the decathlon in the 1956 Olympic Games in Melbourne, Australia. He tried to follow in his footsteps of his idol at that time, who was the 1952 champion, and maybe the 48 champion too, but definitely 52 champion, Bob Mathias. So 1956, Johnson won the silver medal. But in 1960, when the games were in Tokyo, Japan, not Tokyo, excuse me, Rome, Italy, 1960, Rayford Johnson and his training buddy, who was originally from Taiwan, who went to UCLA, named C.K. Yang, battled for the decathlon championship, Olympic gold medal in 1960. And Rayford Johnson ended up winning that gold medal that year, 1960. He won the gold medal in Rome and win the championship there. So he was definitely the world's greatest athlete. He was the Sportsman of the Year that year in Sports Illustrated, and he would go on to have a career as an actor. He was a sportscaster throughout his life, but he had one really fateful night that took place on June 5th, 1968. It was at the what was the name of the hotel there? Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. And it was the night Robert F. Kennedy would announce his win in the California Democratic primary, and would go on to try to win the presidency in 1968. Well, fate took a hand in that, and an assassin named Sirhan Sirhan would shoot and kill Robert Kennedy on that night. Now, bear in mind, this was about 2 months after, almost exactly 2 months after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And there's footage of Robert F. Kennedy announcing Martin Luther King's death that night. And Sirhan could have gotten away with it except for two people. Two people helped disarm him and keep him for the police. One was Rosie Greer, the former member of the fearsome foursome defensive line of the Los Angeles Rams. The other was Rayford Johnson. And it said it changed his life. It changed his life. And it was a really tough moment for Rayford Johnson that day. But they would disarm Sirhan. And he was, Sirhan, I believe, is still alive. And the crazy thing about that, just as a side note on this, Sirhan, from what I've heard, has not remembered ever doing this. There was an old movie, in fact, it was done twice. Denzel Washington did the second version of the movie called The Manchurian Candidate, which basically means that you were given some sort of drug, you were told to perform a certain deed, and after the deed is done, you quickly forget it. And they're saying, I'm not exactly sure how true this is, but they were saying that Sirhan may have been a Manchurian Candidate that night. So Rayford Johnson helped disarm Sirhan along with Rosie Greer. Now, flash forward a few years to 1984. It was August of, maybe in August of 1984. And at that time, I was working as an intern at the Voice of America here in Washington, D.C. I was in the sports department. And while our reporters were in the field, I would be filing different reports from different events going on in the Olympics. Great time. Oh, I had a beautiful time that day. And 1984, the games of the 23rd Olympiad were in Los Angeles at the Coliseum, starting at the Coliseum. And it was tremendous day. Tremendous time, really. Two weeks of joy. I mean, it was a great thing. And Rayford Johnson was the man who lit the Olympic cauldron that day. If those of you remember back in 96 in Atlanta when Muhammad Ali did it, it's a very similar situation. The only thing was Rayford Johnson had to go up these very, very long and look very steep flight of stairs. And before he did it, and he finally did it. Now, here's a weird connection to this. There's a movie, and it's on HBO Max now. If you want to see it, it is one of the great documentaries I've ever known. It's called 16 Days of Glory, and it chronicles not the entire 84 Olympiad, but it chronicles different, very special stories within the games. Some of the stories are very familiar. They're involving very familiar people. There's stories of Edward Moses and Mary Lou Retton. And there are other stories that are not so familiar. Some of the stories not even those of people who were American athletes. There were athletes from other places around the world. There was one on a very touching story on a Japanese judoka who, right before his gold medal match, he, I believe, broke his foot. But he persevered. He ended up winning the gold medal that year. The man who created that documentary and did many Olympic documentaries over the years of that time was a man by the name of Bud Greenspan. And after the Olympics were over, he started to promote the movie. And he came to Voice of America to do an interview with us. I got a chance to meet him. Great man, really, really eccentric guy. He had these glasses that he put on top of his head, and his head was bald. It was very weird, but he was a great guy. And having a chance to meet him and then see the movie for the first time. I bought the VHS copy of the movie. That's how long this movie's been. But and got to see it. It was breathtaking. The movie is breathtaking. And it's on, like I said, it's on HBO Max. It's a very long movie. It's about 4.5 hours long. The whole movie is about 4.5 hours long, but it is, every moment of it is worth it. It is a beautiful movie. Once again, it's called 16 Days of Glory. It was done by the late, great Bud Greenspan. And that's my connection with Rayford Johnson. You know, as weird as it is, that's where that connection is. But he was a great story. And Rayford Johnson, again, did a lot of great things in his career, in his life. You know, of course, Olympic decathlon champion. And he passed away this past week. Now, going back to my wrestling love. We lost one of the most influential men in the history of the business. He was influential in so many ways in this business that his imprint, much like Dusty Rhodes' imprint, is on this and will be on this business forever. He was born Pierre Clermont, but the world knew him as Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson, you look at his career, and again, I've had the privilege of watching a good portion of his career. His imprint is all over the place. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. Now, he came to prominence in San Francisco, California. He was always billed for being from San Francisco, and there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But he was always billed for being from San Francisco, California, and he had a tag team partner by the name of Ray the Crippler Stevens. And why Ray the Crippler Stevens is not in the WWE Hall of Fame is totally beyond me. This man was incredible. One of the greatest workers ever. Great promo. You know, just beautiful. He had two legendary tag teams. Now his tag team with Pat Patterson, but also his tag team with the late great Nick Bockwinkel. So Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens were the Blonde Bombers in the late 60s, early 70s. And then in 1979, Patterson would come to the World Wrestling Federation, as it was called at that time. And he would win the North American Heavyweight Championship from Ted DiBiase. And he would defend the title for a few weeks. And then one day, he came to wrestling, and he held his new belt. And apparently he had won this belt in a tournament. I want to emphasize the air quotes there. Tournament in Rio de Janeiro. And again, there's a reason for that too. We'll get to that in a second. And he became the first ever Intercontinental Champion. That's where we get the Intercontinental title from. It was through Pat Patterson. And he would defend the title. He would get some shots at Bob Backlund, who was the world champion at that time. And then the Grand Wizard, who was managing him at that time, apparently sold his contract to Lou Albano, Captain Lou Albano. And they didn't get along. Let's be perfectly frank, they did not get along. And subsequently, Patterson would turn face. He'd have some major league feuds, especially with Sergeant Slaughter. And the rest of his career would be history until the mid-'80s, early 80s, when he became a broadcaster alongside Vince McMahon. And he had this very unique style of broadcasting because of his French accent and, you know, the way he would talk. And, you know, I've heard Mick Foley imitate him. It's so funny because when things would happen, like Bob Becker would have Larry Zbyszko in a headlock and he would put him in the atomic skull crusher and then we all just go banana. That was his thing. He'd go banana. Not bananas, but banana. Okay. So that was sort of one of the things about that. And so we just kind of laughed about that. So now, as he went into retirement, Patterson became very influential behind the scenes. And I think his biggest contribution to the WWE in particular was the development and the idea of my favorite pay-per-view of the year. Now, I love WrestleMania. WrestleMania is a beautiful pay-per-view with all the glitz and glam and everything. But my personal favorite is a pay-per-view known as the Royal Rumble. The Royal Rumble is, I mean, in its simplicity, It is genius. It is such a genius thing. It's the object is you take a battle royal, but you give everybody a number. Everybody has to pick a number out. And instead of going in, in the room, in the ring all the same times, the first two would go in. The person who drew number one would go in, and number two would go in. And they would fight for like 5 minutes, and then every 2 minutes, another wrestler, according to their number, would go into the ring until all 30 men, whatever, were in the ring. And that was it. Brilliant. Brilliant. And it's a fun pay-per-view main event to watch. It really is a beautiful thing to watch. Because you hear the fans counting down the last 10 seconds. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And Pat Patterson came up with that. And of course, his influence all throughout the wrestling was good. Now, here's also what he's going to be known for, too. And the reason why there was the fact that he was from San Francisco, and the reason why the inside joke of him winning that tournament in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. For those who don't know, many of you know this, but for those who don't know, Pat Patterson was the first openly gay professional wrestler. There were wrestlers like Adrian Street who were effeminate. Adrian Donis had an effeminate character at one point. Of course, the legendary Gorgeous George started all that, basically. But Pat Patterson was gay. He was a homosexual. And that must have been very difficult for him to really hide, for the most part, undercover. I mean, I think some people knew, especially those who played those jokes and had those ribs, but the majority of wrestling fans and people within wrestling did not know that he was gay. And there's an episode of the WWE series Legends House where he comes out, quote unquote. I think some people at that time, people had known, but still made good television. But his autobiography is called Accepted. How the first openly gay pro wrestler becomes accepted in the business. And that was Pat Patterson. He was remarkable. I give him so much credit. He was a great mind. Everybody said he had one of the greatest minds in the business. I have no reason to doubt that. And they said one of the things he liked to do was sing karaoke. And the WWE put up a gorgeous tribute. Almost crying about it. Thinking about it now. To Pat Patterson, to the tune of Frank Sinatra's version of My Way. And during the tribute, you can actually hear Pat Patterson singing it during the tribute too. It's lovely. And that's the one thing you can truly say about him. And, some of the visionaries we've lost over the years, guys like Rocky Johnson and Dusty Rhodes, of course, and many others, they did things their way. And it was so successful, despite all the hardships, despite all the barriers in their way. They were so good at doing things their way. And you can't help but admire that. And so, our tribute to Pat Patterson, one of the greatest influential minds in the wrestling business, along with Rayford Johnson, the Olympic decathlon champion, and of course, my buddy, Rodney Wright. Some great people, no question about that. So that'll do it for another edition of the Box on Beltway Podcast Network. As always, Box on Beltway Podcast Network brought to you our real-time pain relief. Go to freepainoffer.com, buy $10 worth of real-time pain relief. Get a free $10 tube of real-time pain relief, now endorsed by two-time world heavyweight champion Big George Foreman. Rub it on. The pain is gone in real time. And by DeborahSpears.com. Great weight loss tips, great jewelry, great training methods at Deborah, Debra Spears.com. Excuse me. Once again, thank you so much for indulging me in this. And again, I've had a lot of things that go on my chest. I was 2 weeks behind I just had a lot to catch up on. I just wanted to do that. Thank you very much for letting me and indulging me into doing that. I'm Gary Digital Williams. Thank you so much for joining us as always. And once again, as always, keep supporting the best boxing in the world. The boxing along the Beltway. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care.